How did America once rely on a weapon almost no one remembers today? The forgotten AA weapon, the 1.1-inch 75, the system meant to shield U.S. warships before 1942. You look at its four barrels, a design once promoted as cutting edge, and you start to wonder why sailors later called it the Chicago piano, with a mix of frustration and disbelief. In battle it jammed, stalled and turned silent at the worst possible moments. You can feel the tension of a crew waiting for a gun that refuses to fire. If you have ever wanted to know how a promising weapon disappeared from history, this is your story. The years before the Pacific War feel strangely calm on the surface, yet inside the U.S. Navy there is a growing sense of urgency. Aircraft are becoming faster, more accurate, and increasingly dangerous to ships, and naval planners understand that the fleet needs something stronger than old machine guns to stop a diving attacker. The search for a new anti-aircraft weapon becomes a priority, and engineers put their hopes into a compact but powerful idea: a four-barrel system that fires thick 1.1-inch shells at high speed. The weapon promises a modern shield for cruisers, carriers, and battleships. In this early stage, it is presented as the answer to a new age of air threats. The Mark I and Mark II mounts begin taking form on drawing boards and shipyards across the country. The designers imagine a gun that could sweep the sky with a dense curtain of fire. The concept seems simple: four barrels arranged in a straight line so the entire cluster looks like an organ keyboard. Sailors later joke about its appearance, but at this moment, the Navy sees it as a serious and ambitious project. Testing crews watch these new mounts firing bursts across quiet ranges, and the impressive sound gives them hope. The recoil patterns, the spray of shell fragments, and the pulse of the mechanism all suggest a weapon ready for a world where aircraft decide the fate of ships. By the late 1930s, the Navy begins mounting the system on surface combatants. The arrival of each new Chicago piano feels like progress. The name spreads because of its shape and because the barrels seem arranged like musical pipes. The nickname is light-hearted, but behind the humor is real pride. Crews believe they have been given something modern, something that can hold its own, even if enemy aircraft appear without warning. Training officers instruct sailors on how to load the heavy clips, how to rotate the mount, and how to keep the mechanism running smoothly. For many, the weapon feels heavy, slow, and complex. But they trust that these issues will be solved through practice and familiarity. As more ships receive the weapon, fleet exercises highlight early challenges. The gun requires a large crew to operate efficiently. The rotation mechanism is heavy and rarely moves with the speed crews expect. Sailors begin to notice that tracking fast targets during training is harder than described in manuals. The weapon also depends on careful maintenance because the feed system is sensitive. A small mistake or a slight misalignment can cause stoppages, yet during these years, no one imagines that these small issues will one day become life-threatening. The Navy continues to install the gun across the fleet because there are no better options ready for mass use. Each passing season adds tension as the world moves closer to war. Reports from Europe describe the destruction caused by air attacks on ships and ports. These stories reinforce the Navy's belief that the Chicago piano will soon become essential. A sense of determination spreads as crews practice loading and firing in all weather conditions. The training rhythm becomes routine. Shells clatter, loaders move in practiced patterns, and gunners follow target balloons drifting through the wind. On the surface, it seems that the Navy is preparing thoroughly, yet beneath the drills is a growing discomfort. Sailors begin noticing repeated jams during long bursts. Occasionally, the traverse system slows to the point where the mount feels almost frozen. Some worry that the weapon is too complicated for the conditions of real battle. Even with these concerns, the fleet continues relying on the gun because it represents the best available compromise. Command officers see its potential and assume that flaws will be corrected once war production begins. The factories work to refine internal parts, strengthen mounts, and improve ammunition feed reliability. Each improvement inspires cautious optimism, yet the fundamental design remains unchanged. It is still heavy, slow to swing, and sensitive to dirt and heat. As war approaches, the Navy faces the difficult reality that the Chicago piano must be used as it is, not as planners once imagined it could be. By 1941, the gun stands as a standard defensive weapon on many major ships. Carriers, cruisers, and destroyers place their faith in its 4 barrels and the thick shells they fire. Sailors spend long nights cleaning chambers, polishing feed guides, and checking springs. They believe these efforts will keep the gun alive in combat. The calm before the Pacific War becomes a strange mixture of confidence and unease. Many still admire the gun, but most cannot ignore the fact that it requires ideal conditions to perform correctly. Battle rarely offers ideal conditions. The final months before disaster are filled with fleet movements and preparation. Refit crews rush to strengthen mounts, attach better sights, and adjust the mechanisms. The Navy knows aircraft will challenge the fleet soon, and the Chicago piano stands at the heart of its pre-war defense plan. Crews pinch their shoulders against cold winds on night watches while thinking about the training they have done with the gun. They hope the weapon will answer when called. The opening days of the Pacific War arrive with a force that crushes every expectation the U.S. Navy held before. The Chicago piano, once treated as a symbol of progress, now faces a storm of real air attacks that grow faster and more coordinated with every passing hour. When Japanese aircraft sweep across the sky in the first major engagements, the Navy learns immediately that training range drills do not prepare a weapon for the noise, smoke, and chaos that fill a ship under attack. The gun that looked powerful on calm mornings now must respond in moments shaped by fear, speed, and confusion. During the early battles of 1941 and 1942, crews run to their mounts as enemy aircraft appear through clouds or sunlight. The Chicago piano begins firing whenever possible, sending bursts of 1.1-inch shells upward. At a distance, the gun looks fierce, a stream of metal rising from the deck. Up close, the story becomes more complicated. Heavy vibration shakes the mount, smoke fills the air around the loaders, and the feed system strains under the rapid motion. A few bursts seem strong and promising, but many others end with an abrupt pause as the mechanism seizes or a clip fails to feed correctly. This sudden silence becomes one of the most painful realities for gunners. They pull and cycle the charging handles, hoping to clear stoppages, while aircraft continue closing in. The mount's slow traverse makes the moment even harder because the target moves faster than the gun can swing. Dive bombers approach at steep angles, and the Chicago piano struggles to follow them. The training circle that once felt large enough now feels narrow and stiff. The heavy weight of the mount resists quick adjustments, and crews fight both the enemy and the machinery. Ship after ship records similar experiences during these first months. Reports describe mounts that respond too slowly to sudden changes in direction. The weapon often cannot match the rhythm of Japanese attacks, which rely on speed and precise timing. The crews know they must keep the gun alive and firing, yet each step in the loading and aiming sequence requires movement through a heavy mechanism. The gunners sense that the weapon was built for a different kind of battle, one slower and more predictable than the sky over the Pacific. The noise of battle makes the technical flaws feel even larger, Engines roar overhead as enemy formations break apart and reform. Anti-aircraft guns fire from every corner of the ship, creating a constant rumble. The Chicago piano tries to join this chorus, but its rhythm breaks again and again from jams or hesitation in the feed system. Gunners sweat as they try to clean and reset the weapon, in the middle of smoke and shaking steel decks. Shell casings roll under their boots. Heat rises from the barrels. The presence of danger turns every second into a struggle. The worst moments occur when the gun simply stops responding while an aircraft approaches in a dive. The mount's slow tracking speed keeps the barrels pointed at empty sky while the threat races downward. Sailors reach for the traverse wheels with all their strength, hoping to move the heavy mount fast enough to place at least a short burst in the path of the attacker. Many times the effort is not enough. Bombs splash into the sea or strike decks before the gun can reposition. Each ship that relies on the Chicago piano experiences a moment when silence becomes more frightening than the explosions around it. These experiences spread through the fleet and shape the opinions of sailors. The weapon they once admired begins to feel unreliable in moments when speed and certainty matter most. Even when the gun fires correctly, the range and accuracy often prove insufficient against aircraft that maneuver sharply and climb rapidly between attacks. Crews understand they are fighting an opponent who trained specifically to exploit weaknesses like slow traverse and sensitive feeding systems. Every few days brings another example from a new engagement, confirming what many already fear. The Chicago piano is not the solution the Navy hoped for. As the Pacific War intensifies, the contrast between expectation and reality grows sharper. The Navy had imagined a weapon that could create a protective curtain around ships. Instead, crews see a system that can perform well only under limited conditions. The gun produces strong bursts but cannot maintain them reliably. The design still impresses on paper, but combat exposes every hidden flaw. The growing unease reflects a shift that moves through the fleet. Sailors begin to wonder whether the Navy can continue depending on a weapon that struggles under every real test. By mid-1942, the first major turning point becomes clear. Officers reviewing battle reports notice patterns that repeat across ships and across engagements. The Chicago piano consistently underperforms against fast-moving aircraft. The problems are not minor defects or rare failures. They are structural limitations built into the design. The Navy starts looking for alternatives with a seriousness that did not exist before the war. The urgent need for reliable anti-aircraft fire becomes impossible to ignore. As the months of war pass, a quiet but powerful shift spreads through the U.S. Navy. The official reports already describe mechanical faults. But the true weight of the Chicago piano's failures comes from the sailors who stand behind it during real attacks. Their memories shape the weapon's reputation more deeply than any technical document. Each story carries the same rhythm. The aircraft approach, the gun fires a short burst, then something stops. The pause becomes longer than expected. The moment stretches while the enemy descends. The gun crew feels the danger rising faster than their machine can respond. These accounts appear in after-action notes from cruisers, carriers, and destroyers. Sailors describe the repeated sound of the feeder struggling to push shells upward. Some recall the heavy clank that signals a jam that cannot be cleared quickly in the heat of battle. During training, these problems seem like minor inconveniences. During combat, they become life-changing moments. The gunners remember the shaking deck under their feet and the pressure of watching a weapon that cannot match the intensity of the attack. They recall the feeling that every second lost increases the chance of destruction. On several ships, the mount freezes at the exact moment when the crew expects to follow a diving bomber. The speed of the dive and the slow movement of the mount create a gap that no effort can close. The crew turns wheels with all their strength, but the heavy mechanism refuses to swing fast enough. The aircraft slips out of the gun's arc before any useful burst can rise into the sky. Many sailors later say they began to trust lighter machine guns more than the Chicago piano because at least the smaller weapons move freely and respond instantly. The contrast grows stronger with every battle. By early 1942, resentment begins forming among younger sailors. They feel they are trapped between their duty and a weapon that cannot support them reliably. They continue to operate the Chicago piano with discipline, because that is their job, but many quietly hope for another system to replace it. In letters home, they describe the odd mixture of fear and frustration that comes from standing behind a machine that should save lives, yet refuses to function at crucial moments. These personal accounts circulate informally through the fleet and add emotional pressure to what had begun as a technical concern. The problems grow even more noticeable during prolonged engagements. When multiple waves of aircraft strike the same task force, the Chicago piano often performs well in the first moments, but declines rapidly as heat builds inside the mechanism. High temperature affects springs, guides, and chambers. Feed problems become far more common after the first few bursts. Crews attempt to cool the system, but the pace of attacks rarely allows enough time for proper maintenance. Ships under continuous assault cannot pause to reset complex machinery. The weapon reveals a design that was not built for the pace of the Pacific War. Another difficulty comes from the ammunition handling process. The 1.1-inch rounds require heavy metal clips that loaders must position at precise angles. In combat conditions, these tasks become harder as smoke fills the air and the ship moves sharply through defensive maneuvers. A single misaligned clip can cause the entire sequence to stop. Gunners report moments when they watch friendly ships in danger while they struggle to fix a feed issue caused by a few millimeters of error. The intense pressure of these scenes reinforces the growing belief that the Chicago piano is too demanding for the reality of war. As more ships record similar failures, the conversation among officers shifts. What began as scattered complaints becomes a pattern that cannot be dismissed. War diaries mention guns that simply do not respond in time. Post-action reviews highlight the difference between expected output and actual performance. Some ships successfully drive off enemy aircraft with multiple guns firing in harmony, but the Chicago piano rarely plays a strong part in those moments. Even when the weapon works correctly, it often lacks the stability and precision needed to follow fast-moving attackers who change direction rapidly. By mid-1942, a sense of inevitability spreads. The sailors' voices have become too consistent to ignore. The technical problems discovered before the war now appear magnified under the pressure of real combat. The weapon's weight, complexity, and sensitivity undermine the confidence of those who depend on it. The Navy begins collecting more detailed data about stoppages and recovery times. Officers compare the Chicago piano's track record with the newer weapons arriving in limited numbers. The contrast is unmistakable. New systems show better reliability, easier handling, and more consistent output. The breaking point arrives when several ships report identical failures across separate battles only days apart. Each case involves a moment when the Chicago piano should have delivered continuous fire, but instead remained silent due to mechanical stoppages. These failures do not destroy the ships involved, yet each moment becomes a symbol of the wider problem. The Navy recognizes that the weapon's shortcomings are not isolated. They are part of its core design. This realization forces the service to consider a transition that once seemed impossible during the pre-war years. By late 1942, the U.S. Navy faces a crossroads. The Chicago piano can no longer meet the demands of fast and aggressive air attacks, and sailors have lost confidence in a weapon that continues to fail under pressure. Every new report arriving from the Pacific shows the same pattern. Slow traverse, constant jams, and the inability to follow sharp diving movements turn the gun into a burden rather than a shield. The Navy understands the danger of remaining tied to a flawed system, so leaders begin pushing for something faster, lighter, and more reliable. This shift marks one of the most important transitions in American naval anti-aircraft history. The first signs of change appear when small numbers of Oerlikon 20mm guns arrive from factories and storage depots. These weapons come from Swiss design but are produced in the United States with improved sights and simplified parts. Their slim frames and compact barrels look very different from the heavy Chicago piano. Sailors immediately notice how easily the Oerlikon moves. The mount rotates smoothly, responding to the slightest touch. The gun fires single shots or bursts without hesitation, something the crews are not used to. Many sailors describe a feeling of relief as they realize their new weapon does not fight them with every movement. It simply follows the target. As more Oerlikons spread through the fleet, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Ships equipped with these lighter guns suddenly gain the ability to track aircraft that once escaped the Chicago piano's reach. The rapid swing of the mount and the high firing rate create a wall of fire that Japanese pilots must now respect. Sailors praise the reliability of the feed system. It accepts drum magazines that lock firmly into place, and reloads take only moments. Even in rough conditions, the Oerlikon maintains steady performance. For many crews, this is the first time they feel confident that their gun will fire every time they pull the trigger. At the same time, another weapon begins entering service. The Bofors 40mm arrives with a reputation already proven in Europe. American engineers adapt its design, strengthen its parts, and prepare it for mass production. The Bofors is heavier than the Oerlikon, but its power and reliability impress everyone who sees it operate. Its shells reach farther and hit harder than the 1.1-inch rounds of the Chicago piano. The gun uses belt feed systems that keep ammunition moving smoothly even during long bursts. Sailors soon recognize that this weapon brings a level of consistency that their earlier system never achieved. The arrival of these two guns changes the mood across the fleet. Instead of working with a complex mount that often stalls, crews now stand behind weapons that respond instantly. The difference becomes most visible during real combat. When enemy aircraft appear on the horizon, Oerlikons and Bofors begin firing with clean rhythm and steady movement. Their bursts form patterns that fill the sky with continuous fire. The predictability of the weapons allows crews to focus on tracking and coordination rather than fighting their own equipment. Ships equipped with the new guns report more successful engagements and fewer moments when targets escape simply due to mechanical delay. As the new weapons prove themselves, the Navy accelerates the transition. Shipyards begin removing Chicago piano mounts during refits and replacing them with combinations of Oerlikon and Bofors guns. This process happens faster than almost any previous change in naval armament. Wartime urgency pushes every level of the service to act quickly. Crews assist in the installation, learning the details of maintenance and operation as soon as the mounts appear on deck. In a matter of months, some ships move from relying entirely on the Chicago piano to using a powerful mix of lighter and heavier guns that cover multiple ranges. The improvements in defensive capability become clear in reports that describe tighter air defense coordination. With reliable weapons that can fire continuously, ships create layered protection that grows stronger with every engagement. The Chicago piano had once been meant to form the core of this system, but now the Oerlikon fills the close-range role and the Bofors handles medium-range targets. The two guns complement each other naturally. The noise they produce during an attack forms a continuous pattern that sailors quickly learn to trust. It is the sound of weapons that do not freeze at the worst moment. Despite the rapid improvements, the transition is not simple. Shipyards must work constantly to produce enough mounts and ammunition. Training programs expand to teach thousands of sailors how to operate the new systems safely and effectively. Crews must adapt to new recoil patterns, new magazine types, and new aiming techniques. Yet, even with these challenges, the mood remains hopeful. The problems they face now involve learning and improvement, not fighting against the design of the gun itself. The contrast with the Chicago piano feels clear to everyone. By early 1943, the change becomes irreversible. Commanders understand that the old gun has no place in the future of naval air defense. The Chicago piano still appears on some ships, but its presence now represents the past rather than the present. The successes of the Oerlikon and Bofors prove that the Navy can field weapons that match the speed and precision of modern aircraft. The sailors who once struggled behind the heavy four-barrel mount now feel the difference in every engagement. Their weapons finally help them rather than hinder them. By late 1943, the U.S. Navy has largely moved on from the Chicago piano, yet the weapon does not disappear all at once. Many older ships still carry at least one mount because refits take time, resources are limited, and some vessels operate far from major repair facilities. These remaining guns now serve in a fleet that has transformed around them. They once represented the cutting edge of American naval defense. Now they stand beside Oerlikons and Bofors that outperform them in every meaningful way. The contrast becomes clear during each new battle, and the Chicago piano's shortcomings become even more visible in the company of better systems. On older cruisers and auxiliary ships, the Chicago piano often occupies secondary firing positions. Crews assigned to these mounts continue to train and prepare because naval discipline demands it, yet they feel the quiet truth of their situation. Their weapon belongs to an earlier stage of the war. When battle alerts sound, the ship's newer guns respond with fast and confident bursts, while the Chicago piano struggles to keep pace. Its heavy frame rotates slowly, often pointing at a target that has already changed direction. The weight of the mount forces sailors to exert constant strength just to follow the motion of the sky. Moments of effectiveness still appear, usually when the weapon fires at aircraft flying predictable paths or when targets cross directly in front of the mount's limited arc. In these specific situations, the Chicago piano can produce bursts that look impressive. Thick shells fill the air and vibrations roll across the deck. Some sailors feel a brief sense of pride when the gun briefly performs the way its designers intended. Yet, these moments are isolated and rarely occur in the fast and chaotic movements of the Pacific War. The majority of the time, the gun simply cannot maintain stable output. As the war intensifies through 1943 and 1944, the ships that still carry the gun face increasingly complex air threats. Japanese pilots begin using coordinated attacks with high-speed fighters and aircraft carrying more advanced bombs. These tactics require defensive weapons that can track sudden shifts in altitude and direction, something the Chicago piano is not built to do. Its heavy structure and sensitive feeding system create delays that feel even longer during high-pressure moments. Sailors watch targets slip out of view before they can fire more than a few shells. In some battles, the gun suffers repeat stoppages within minutes. Heat builds quickly in the chambers and springs. Feed trays and guides start to deform or resist movement. Crews attempt emergency cooling by pouring water on the barrels between bursts, but this provides only a moment of relief. The war demands a sustained tempo that the Chicago piano cannot sustain. When the Bofors on nearby mounts continue firing long bursts without pause, the contrast becomes painful for the sailors responsible for the older weapon. They see what a modern system can do, and they feel trapped behind the limitations of the past. On certain ships, the Chicago piano becomes a backup weapon. It remains ready in case the primary mounts are damaged or overloaded. During intense attacks, some crews prepare their mount even though they know the gun may jam at any moment. Their determination shows the spirit of the sailors, not the strength of the weapon itself. They continue their duties despite doubts. Stories from these crews often describe the heavy emotional weight of watching a gun that no longer belongs in the battles they face. They operate it because the ship needs every available defensive tool, but they know its best days exist only in pre-war planning. By 1944, the last significant battles involving the Chicago piano occur in scattered locations. Some ships fight in secondary roles, during escort missions or patrol operations, where the air threat is lighter. Even here, the weaknesses appear whenever a fast attacker emerges from cloud cover. The barrel cluster struggles to track it, and the feed system often hesitates. The gunners feel the same pressure that earlier crews felt in 1942, but now the rest of the fleet has moved forward. The Chicago piano stands alone in its flaws. These final combat episodes reveal how much naval warfare has changed in only a few years. The Pacific War forces rapid innovation in tactics, training, and equipment. The gun that once seemed so advanced is now outdated beyond repair. The Navy continues to remove the remaining mounts whenever ships reach ports with proper refit facilities. New weapons replace them quickly, and crews feel relief when the heavy 4-barrel mount finally leaves the deck. The departure marks the end of an era defined by hope, disappointment, and hard lessons. As the Chicago piano begins to disappear from the fleet, its legacy becomes clearer. It represents a transition period in American naval thinking, a moment when technology struggled to keep pace with the rising power of air attack. The weapons failures pushed the Navy toward better solutions, and the introduction of Oerlikon and Bofors guns changes the future of naval defense. The contrast between these systems shows how much the fleet has learned through costly experience. By early 1945, the Chicago piano stands in a strange position within the U.S. Navy. It is still present on a few older ships, yet the fleet around it has become almost unrecognizable compared to the one that entered the war. New carriers, new cruisers, and new destroyers now carry dense layers of Oerlikon and Bofors guns, along with improved fire control systems that allow faster and more accurate responses to air attack. The rapid growth of American naval power leaves little room for a weapon designed in a different era. The 1.1-inch gun that once symbolized modern firepower now looks heavy and outdated among sleek and efficient mounts. The final months of combat emphasize this divide. Enemy air attacks remain dangerous, but the ships equipped with newer systems handle these threats with confidence. The Oerlikons sweep close-range targets with precise bursts. The Bofors create a powerful mid-range shield that breaks the timing of enemy formations. Radar-directed fire merges with human skill to create a network of defense that no longer depends on the older generation of weapons. The Chicago piano still fires when called, but its performance feels disconnected from the modern rhythm of the fleet. Its bursts appear short and uneven compared to the steady patterns of surrounding guns. In many ways, the weapon's disappearance happens quietly. There is no formal ceremony and no final battle that defines its end. Instead, the gun fades one mount at a time as ships return to port for overhaul. Dockyard workers remove the heavy clusters from their platforms and lift them onto the pier with cranes. Sailors who once trained on the mount barely react. The moment feels routine, almost expected. The gun leaves the deck the same way it arrived, carried by machines guided by men who understand that war has moved forward without waiting for older designs to keep up. As these removals continue, naval historians and technical officers begin reviewing the weapon's short service life. What they find is a picture shaped by good intentions, but limited by engineering realities. Before 1942, the Chicago piano promised a level of firepower that seemed impressive for its size. However, the demands of real combat revealed weaknesses hidden during peacetime trials. The weapon could not swing fast enough to track modern dive bombers. Its feed system remained sensitive even after modifications. Its heavy structure limited reaction time during unpredictable attacks. These problems formed the story of a weapon that tried to meet a challenge that evolved faster than the gun itself. In discussions after major battles, officers reflect on how quickly the Navy had to transform. They note that the failures of the Chicago piano acted as a catalyst for improvement. Without these early lessons, the push to adopt Oerlikon and Bofors systems might have been slower. The urgency created by the gun's shortcomings forced the Navy to search for better solutions and to modernize the fleet at a pace rarely seen in military history. The weapon's legacy becomes tied not to its achievements, but to the progress that followed its decline. For many sailors, the memories of the Chicago piano remain emotional rather than technical. They remember standing behind the mount during the early months of the war, feeling the pressure of attacks that seemed unstoppable. They recall the frustration of clearing jams under smoke-filled skies and wrestling with a weapon that demanded perfect conditions in a world where nothing stayed steady for long. Some feel sympathy for the gun because it represented the best effort available before the war exposed the true nature of modern air power. Others associate it with fear because they lived through moments when its silence placed their ship in danger. As the war nears its end, the weapon's role becomes more symbolic than practical. It represents a time when the Navy did not yet understand the full challenge posed by aircraft. It shows how quickly expectations can collapse under the speed of real combat. It also reflects the extraordinary ability of the wartime Navy to correct mistakes and reshape its strength. The Chicago piano becomes a reminder that innovation is not always successful and that even well-intended designs can fail when tested by the harsh reality of modern warfare. By the time peace returns in 1945, only a handful of the guns remain in storage. Some are kept for training or engineering study. Others sit in supply yards waiting for disposal. As the Navy prepares for a post-war world, the Chicago piano receives little attention. Newer weapons dominate the conversation. The rapid technological rise of radar fire control, proximity fuses, and advanced anti-aircraft systems make the old 1.1-inch design appear almost ancient. No one imagines bringing it back into service. Its chapter has fully closed. This final moment completes the story of a weapon that began with high hopes and ended in obscurity. It entered the war as a centerpiece of American naval defense, but left the stage as a reminder of how quickly military needs can outgrow early ideas. The Chicago piano becomes a forgotten AA weapon, not because it lacked importance, but because the fleet moved beyond it with remarkable speed. Its silence remains part of the history of a Navy that learned, adapted, and evolved under the pressure of a world changing faster than anyone expected.